The sound of popcorn crunching under his shoes made Yale Monroe hesitate. He glanced around the dimly lit movie theater lobby, scanning the faces of the employees behind the counter. They looked exhausted, barely holding themselves together as they rushed through orders. If his father could see this place now, he'd be furious. 15 theaters, built from the ground up by his dad, passed down to him 5 years ago. Yale had promised to keep them thriving. But lately, customer complaints had skyrocketed. Dirty theaters, rude staff, poor service. His district manager, Greg, assured him it was under control. But something didn't sit right. Numbers were dropping and employees were quitting at an alarming rate. So he decided to see for himself. With a full beard, thick glasses, and a slightly hunched posture, he looked nothing like the clean-cut CEO he was. No one here had ever met him in person. Most employees only knew the company name, not the man behind it. It was the perfect cover. Tonight he was Dale Martin, a new trainee. A sharp voice pulled him back to the present. "Hey, new guy, you just gonna stand there? Or are you actually gonna work?" Yale turned toward a middle-aged man in a wrinkled manager's polo. The name tag read Rick. His tone was sharp, impatient. "Sorry," Yale said. "Where do you want me?" Rick rolled his eyes. "Concessions. Sophia will show you." A teenage girl, no older than 17, gave him a small nod before leading him behind the counter. She moved fast, grabbing a soda cup as she talked. "You scoop popcorn here, drinks are over there, candy's in the drawers. Keep up, or Rick will lose it." Yale frowned. "Is he always like that?" Sophia hesitated, then forced a tight smile. "Just don't mess up." It didn't take long for Yale to see the problem. The place was understaffed badly. 3 people were running an area that needed at least 6. The soda machine was sticky from dried syrup and the popcorn station was a mess. Customers were grumbling about the wait, but the employees were scrambling. Rick, meanwhile, wasn't lifting a finger. He stood by the office door, scrolling on his phone. At one point, Yale accidentally overfilled a popcorn bag, spilling some on the counter. Rick's voice shot across the room. "Hey, idiot! Are you blind? That's money you're wasting." Yale clenched his jaw. He wasn't used to being spoken to like that, but tonight, he wasn't the owner. He was just another worker. Sophia quickly wiped up the spilled popcorn. "Just ignore him," she whispered. By the time the last movie started, the lobby was a disaster. Trash cans overflowed, floors were sticky, and the 3 employees looked ready to collapse. "All right, clean up," Rick called. "And don't leave until it's spotless." Yale grabbed a broom, but Sophia hesitated. "My shift ended 10 minutes ago," she said, voice small. Rick scoffed. "And? You leave when I say you leave." Sophia swallowed hard, shoulders tensing. Yale stepped in. "I can finish up. She's already done a ton." Rick's glare turned on him. "You don't get to decide that, rookie." Sophia didn't argue. She just grabbed a rag and started wiping counters again. An hour later, the theater was finally clean. Rick barely glanced up from his phone. "Lock up when you leave," he muttered, then walked out. Sophia moved slower than before, exhaustion clear in her posture. After taking out the last trash bag, she stepped outside. Yale followed a moment later, pausing when he saw her. She was sitting on the curb near the parking lot, crying. Her hands were clenched together, silent tears running down her face. She wasn't making a sound, just letting the exhaustion, the frustration, the unfairness of it all sink in. Yale stood frozen. Something was very, very wrong here. Yale hesitated, watching Sophia wipe at her face with the sleeve of her uniform. She wasn't sobbing, just silently breaking down, like this was something she'd done before. A part of him wanted to walk away. He was supposed to be undercover, after all, but another part, the part that had spent years building this company alongside his father, knew he couldn't. He stepped forward. The motion made Sophia glance up, startled. She quickly turned away, rubbing her eyes harder. "Thought you left," she muttered. Yale sat down on the curb, keeping a respectful distance. "Saw you sitting here." She let out a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah. Just resting for a second." He didn't push, just waited. After a moment, she exhaled shakily. "It's fine. Just a long day." Yale studied her. There was a tiredness in her voice that went beyond just today. "You work a lot of these late shifts?" She nodded, still not looking at him. Almost every night. Something about the way she said it made him frown. You in school? Yeah. A slight pause. Well, I'm supposed to be. That hit differently. He turned to face her fully. What do you mean? Sophia hesitated, then shrugged like it didn't matter. I was going after classes, but my grades were slipping. Couldn't keep up with homework. So I just stopped going as much. Yale felt an uncomfortable weight settle in his chest. Because of work? She let out a breath. My mom's sick. She hasn't worked in months. Bills don't stop though. Yale didn't know what to say to that. Sophia finally looked at him, her expression resigned. It's okay. I'll figure it out. He didn't believe that. Not when her voice was so small. Not when she had just finished a shift where she was berated, overworked, and forced to stay late without pay. How long have you been working here? Almost a year. Her lips pressed together. It was better before. Yale's stomach turned. Before what? Before Rick took over. He wasn't surprised, but hearing it out loud made it worse. Sophia glanced toward the parking lot. I should go. My bus comes soon. Yale nodded, standing up as she did. Before she walked off, he said, Hey, you're a hard worker. Sophia gave a small, tired smile. Thanks, Dale. She walked toward the bus stop, leaving Yale standing there, fists clenched. He had seen enough. The next day, Yale returned. This time, he focused on observation. Rick was the same barking orders, doing as little as possible himself. Employees avoided him when they could, flinching when they couldn't. The floor was constantly short-staffed, but requests for more help were dismissed. At one point, a customer complained about their popcorn being stale. Instead of fixing it, Rick rolled his eyes and told them to deal with it. When they asked for a refund, he waved them off. Not my problem. Yale's jaw tightened. The words echoed in his head. Not my problem. That was the attitude running this place into the ground. Later, when Rick disappeared into the office again, Yale found Sophia restocking candy at the counter. You okay? He asked, keeping his voice casual. She glanced at him. Same as yesterday. He lowered his voice. Does Rick ever mess with your hours? She hesitated. Yale could see the conflict in her expression. Finally, she said sometimes. We all get scheduled more than we should. Like, if I have school, he'll still put me down for a closing shift. If I can't do it, he'll threaten to give my hours to someone else permanently. Yale's hands curled into fists. That's not okay, he said. Sophia gave him a look like he was naive. What am I supposed to do? Quit? I need the job. Before he could respond, Rick's voice cut through the air. Hey. Less talking, more working. Sophia flinched, quickly turning back to the candy. Yale simply stared at Rick. The man met his gaze, unimpressed. What? Rick snapped. You got a problem? Yale felt his pulse in his ears. Oh, Rick. You have no idea. Yale stood his ground, staring at Rick. The man's expression was impatient, as if daring him to say something. He wanted to. Every instinct screamed at him to tear this place apart, to expose Rick's incompetence right then and there. But that wouldn't fix the problem the right way. Instead, he forced his shoulders to relax and turned back to the counter. Rick muttered something under his breath before walking away. Yale exhaled slowly, pushing down the anger clawing at his chest. This wasn't just about Sophia. Every employee here was suffering under Rick's leadership. The short staffing, the forced overtime, the blatant disregard for customers, it was all connected. Greg, the district manager, had assured him things were fine, but clearly that was a lie. Either Greg was incompetent or he was covering for Rick. Neither option was acceptable. Yale had seen enough. It was time to end this. That night, he waited until the last employee had clocked out before stepping into the manager's office. Rick was inside, feet propped up on the desk, scrolling through his phone. The office was cluttered, papers stacked haphazardly, and open soda can leaving a ring on important documents. Rick barely looked up. You need something, rookie? Yale shut the door behind him. Yeah. We need to talk. Rick sighed dramatically, setting his phone down. Look, if this is about your shift, take it up with scheduling. Not my problem. Yale pulled off his glasses and straightened his posture. Actually, it is. Rick blinked. What? Yale reached into his pocket, pulling out his real ID. He placed it on the desk, letting Rick read the name, Yale Monroe, owner. Rick's face drained of color. His mouth opened, then closed. You. Yale leaned forward slightly. I own this theater. And the other 14 locations. You've been working for me this entire time. Rick swallowed hard. Save it, Yale cut in. I don't need excuses. I've seen everything I need to see. The understaffing, the way you talk to employees, the unpaid overtime, the way you ignore customer complaints. And worst of all, you've created an environment where a teenage girl is forced to choose between school and keeping her job because you threaten to cut her hours if she speaks up. Rick's hands gripped the arms of his chair. He forced a weak chuckle. Look, this is just how things run, okay? We're short-staffed and kids these days, they don't want to work. Stop talking, Yale snapped. His voice was sharp, final. Rick flinched. You're done, Yale continued. As of right now, you're fired. Clean out your desk. Security will escort you out. Rick's face twisted. You can't be serious. Do I look like I'm joking? Rick opened his mouth again, but whatever argument he had died under Yale's glare. He pushed himself up from his chair, muttering under his breath, and started gathering his things. Yale watched him for a moment before pulling out his phone and dialing a number. Greg, he said when the district manager answered. We need to talk. Now. Greg arrived an hour later, his expression carefully neutral. He had always been smooth, the kind of guy who could dodge accountability with just the right amount of corporate jargon. Yale, Greg greeted, stepping into the office. Didn't expect to see you here. Sit down, Yale said. Greg hesitated, then lowered himself into the chair Rick had vacated. What's this about? Yale folded his arms. Rick is gone. Fired him tonight. Greg barely reacted. Okay. That's all you have to say? Greg exhaled, rubbing his jaw. Look, I get it. He's rough around the edges. But these theaters aren't easy to run. Finding good managers is tough and… Did you know what was happening here? Yale interrupted. Greg hesitated just a little too long. Yale's stomach turned. You did. Greg sighed. We've had staffing issues for months. I told Rick to keep things running however he could. By forcing employees to work overtime without pay? By letting the place fall apart? By bullying teenagers into staying late when they have school the next morning? Greg leaned back, exhaling through his nose. I didn't tell him to do that. But you knew, Yale said flatly. And you let it happen. Greg didn't answer. Yale shook his head. You're fired too. Greg stiffened. Yale, come on. Be reasonable. I've been with this company long enough to know better, Yale cut in. And you still let this happen. So, no. I don't need you in this company anymore. Greg stared at him for a long moment. Then, seeing there was no room for negotiation, he stood. Without another word, he walked out. Yale exhaled slowly, pressing his fingers to his temples. The hard part was done. Now, it was time to fix what had been broken. The next morning, Yale arrived at the theater without the disguise. He walked in wearing a pressed button-down and dark slacks, his usual sharp, professional look. Employees glanced up, some recognizing him from the past 2 nights, others from the company's internal emails. The tension in the air was thick, but he wasn't here to intimidate, he was here to rebuild. Sophia stood behind the counter, organizing candy boxes. She noticed him immediately, her brows pulling together in confusion. She started, but trailed off. Yale gave her a small nod, stepping closer. My name's Yale Monroe. I own this place. Her eyes widened. Wait. What? He rested his hands on the counter. I went undercover to see what was really happening here. I saw how hard you work. I saw what Rick put you through. That's over now. Sophia stared at him, processing his words. He's gone. Fired last night. She exhaled slowly, the shock clear in her expression. And Greg? Yale nodded. Also fired. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then her shoulders relaxed slightly. Wow. Yale leaned in a little. I also know about your situation at home. Your mom's school? Everything. Sophia tensed again, but Yale spoke before she could respond. You should never have had to choose between your education and keeping your job. That's not how this place should be run. It's not how my father built it. She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the candy box in her hands. I didn't have a choice. You do now, Yale said firmly. You're getting a raise, effective immediately. And I'm reducing your hours during the school year so you can focus on your education. If you need extra shifts during breaks, we'll work with you. Sophia blinked rapidly. You don't have to do that. Yale's voice softened. I do. And I should have known about this sooner. She looked down as if trying to keep herself composed. Thank you. He nodded. And I'm not just doing this for you. Every employee here is getting a fair schedule. No more forced overtime, no more working off the clock. Sophia let out a slow breath. That's really good. A voice from behind interrupted them. Is that actually happening? Yale turned to see Marcus, one of the night shift workers, standing nearby. A few other employees had gathered, clearly listening in. It is, Yale confirmed. Starting today, things change. Marcus crossed his arms, skeptical. We've heard that before. Corporate sends someone down, says things will get better, but nothing actually happens. Yale met his gaze. This isn't just talk. Rick and Greg are gone. A new manager is coming in, one who actually knows how to lead. And I'll be personally overseeing changes to make sure this place runs the way it should. Another employee, a woman in her 20s, hesitated before speaking. So, does that mean we're getting more staff? Yes, Yale said. We're hiring immediately. No more running a skeleton crew. A few employees exchanged glances. Hopeful but cautious. Sophia spoke up again. What about customer complaints? They've been bad for a while. Yale nodded. We're making operational changes. Better training, better support. And I want to hear from all of you. If something's wrong, I need to know about it before it gets out of control. Marcus let out a breath. All right, if you're serious, that's good to hear. I am, Yale assured him. The tension in the room eased slightly. It would take time for full trust to rebuild, but this was the first step. Later that afternoon, Yale sat in the office, now cleared of Rick's mess, reviewing applications for a new manager. He wasn't going to rush this decision. The next leader had to be someone who actually cared. As he worked, there was a knock on the door. Sophia peeked in. Can I ask you something? Yale gestured for her to come in. Of course. She stepped inside, hesitating. Why? Why did you do all this? He leaned back in his chair. Because this company is my responsibility. And because no one should ever feel the way you did last night. She nodded slowly. I really thought nothing would change. Yale's voice was steady. It has. And it will stay that way. For the first time since he met her, Sophia looked like she truly believed him. Yale sat at his desk, reviewing the latest batch of managerial applications. He had already discarded several. Some lacked experience, others had red flags in their work history. He wasn't going to rush this hire. The wrong person in charge had nearly destroyed this location, and he wouldn't let that happen again. The door creaked open. Sophia stepped inside, her expression hesitant. I didn't mean to interrupt, she said. Yale set the papers down. You're not. What's on your mind? She hesitated, shifting her weight. I just wanted to ask, what happens next? I mean, long term. Yale leaned back, considering her question. The first step is getting a new manager in place, someone who actually respects the team, he said. After that, we're implementing better scheduling, hiring more staff, and making sure no one gets forced into working off the clock again. Sophia nodded slowly but didn't leave. There's something else, Yale observed. She exhaled. I don't want to sound ungrateful, but I guess I just don't trust that things will stay good. Not just here, but in general. Yale studied her. Because of what you've been through? She shrugged slightly, looking at the floor. People promise things will get better, but it doesn't always last. I've had teachers tell me they'd help me keep up, but then they stop checking in. I've had jobs where the manager starts off nice, then turns into someone like Rick after a few months. Yale nodded. That's fair. You've been let down before. She met his gaze. Yeah. He didn't rush his response. I can't promise every manager will be perfect, but I can promise that I'll keep watching. This place is important to me, and I won't let it slide back into what it was. Sophia considered his words. You're really going to check in? Even after this whole undercover thing is over? I am, he said firmly. I should have been doing that from the start. She let out a small breath. Okay. I hope you mean it. I do, he assured her. Sophia gave a small nod and turned toward the door. Before she left, Yale spoke again. One more thing. She paused. The theater is covering your back pay for every extra hour you worked off the clock, he said. I had the payroll team run the numbers. Sophia's eyes widened slightly. Wait, really? You earned that money, Yale said. And you're getting it. For the first time, she looked genuinely surprised, almost unsure how to respond. Thank you, she said after a moment. You don't have to thank me for paying you what you were owed, Yale said. That should have happened a long time ago. She gave him a quick nod before leaving. Yale exhaled, running a hand through his hair. There was still a long way to go, but this was a start. 2 days later, Yale met with the final candidates for the manager position. He had narrowed it down to 3 people, but after conducting interviews, one stood out, a woman named Lisa who had previously managed a high-performing theater in another city. Lisa sat across from him in the office, her posture straight, her expression confident but not arrogant. "I've read your file," Yale said. "You turned your last theater around in under a year. What's your leadership style?" Lisa didn't hesitate. "Fair, but firm. I don't tolerate laziness, but I also don't believe in running people into the ground. If employees feel valued, they work harder. If they feel disposable, they stop caring." Yale nodded. "That's the kind of leadership I need here." Lisa glanced around the office. "I've heard this place needs work. Toxic management, understaffing, employees being overworked. What's your expectation for me?" "I want this theater to be a place where employees don't dread coming to work," Yale said. "That doesn't mean I expect perfection. It means I expect respect both from the leadership team and the staff. If you take this job, you'll have full authority to fix what's broken. But I'll be watching." Lisa met his gaze. "That's exactly the kind of challenge I like." Yale extended his hand. "Then welcome aboard." She shook it without hesitation. The next day, Yale called a meeting with the employees. They gathered in the lobby, some skeptical, others cautiously hopeful. Lisa stood beside him. "This is Lisa, your new manager," Yale announced. "She's here to make sure this place runs the way it should." Lisa stepped forward. "I know things have been rough here. I'm not going to pretend I can fix everything overnight. But I will tell you this: I don't tolerate disrespect, from staff or management. If you work hard, I've got your back. If you slack off, we'll have a problem." A few employees exchanged looks. Sophia spoke up. "What about scheduling?" Lisa nodded. "Schedules will be fair, and no one will be forced to stay late without pay. If anyone has concerns, my door is open." Marcus folded his arms. "And if we start slipping back into old habits?" Yale spoke this time. "That won't happen. I'll be making regular visits, and I expect to hear the truth from you all, not just from management." The employees seemed to absorb his words. The tension in the room eased slightly. Lisa clapped her hands together. "All right, let's get to work." As the employees dispersed, Yale caught sight of Sophia watching him. She gave a small nod, not overly enthusiastic, but approving. Yale returned it. The work wasn't done, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like things were headed in the right direction.